Up front, your dominance is most important, right? On the back end, your masculinity is more important. And I think this is an important concept to grasp, right? See, what I want to talk about right now is the concept of validation laundering, right? Validation laundering. Because we have to understand that within relationships, that the currency within relationships is typically some form of validation. You got to understand what that means. You're laundering your power within that relationship, your influence. See, the reason I use the word laundering is because when it comes to prematurely integrated relationships, there's typically a certain arc that it goes through. Let's say two people meet each other, right? Let's say the man is masculine submissive, the woman's masculine submissive. You both are young. You're not yet properly you're socialized, but you're not at a place in your life where either one of you have really lived through your shadow. You haven't integrated your shadow yet into your consciousness, into your conscious personality. You're like, as a man, when you're masculine submissive, typically you're repressing your dominance, right? And you're taking your dominance and you're repressing it and forming covert contracts, right? Now, a covert contract is when you are in scarcity, you're not in abundance, and you're giving from a place of the masculine submissive in a way that looks like the feminine submissive, but it's not coming from a place of abundance. So if a person doesn't reciprocate you in the way that you feel that you should be reciprocated and give you the things that will validate your ego, they give you the freedom and the space to be dominant, to feel received within your dominant energy, then you will start to feel resentment and embitterness. You'll feel embittered towards the woman. And oftentimes this will be exacerbated by fear due to that Madonna whore complex, because when you've integrated neither your shadow nor your anima, then you have somewhat of an inability to see a woman as a full woman. So that means that even if you have love, the root, the seed of love can be there, but most of that relationship dynamic is built off an attachment based off of your ego. Now, I don't have too much of an issue with the ego. The ego is a social survival instinct, but the ego has to be properly oriented towards a realistic lifestyle for you, for your level of dominance, right? And that's where the anima is important, but that's somewhat important after integrating your shadow. Now, I'm not sure if that's how Jung intended for the shadow to be integrated before the anima or animus, but that's just my perspective on it, right? And the reason why I take that stance is because in this day and age, like I said, up front, your dominance is most important. On the back end, your masculinity is more important. Now, what I mean by masculinity in this sense is your security becomes more important in a long-term scenario. It doesn't take that much security. It doesn't take as much. I'm not going to say that much. It doesn't take as much security to be very upfront and direct with a woman about your sexual intentions with her. It doesn't take that much, right? It takes more security than a lot of men have, because many men fear sexual rejection. But when you integrate your shadow, part of that process is coming to an understanding of the woman's shadow, of her submissive sexual ego that's looming in her shadow. Because for most women, as they're being socialized, especially in the Bible Belt and just in general, a woman is socialized to believe that sex is her value from a traditional point of view. From traditional or modern. That part of her value is that her body, her virtue, her purity is her worth. So if she has sex with a man, it's because this man is providing emotionally, socially, financially. But there is very little discussed about a woman who's reaching the age of adulthood, prioritizing being sexually attracted to her partner. So either she may choose a man who's not that sexually appealing to her because he lacks dominance, right? And dominance is what it yields to that, or the submissive sexual ego yields to experiencing dominance, right? Into feeling that energy. But if she's in the presence of a man she is sexually attracted to, she may repress it and see that man as bad, right? That's where the animus comes in, right? That outward projection of the way a woman views men, and typically it's going to be split into two different types of guys. Just like a man may have a Madonna whore complex, a woman may have a gentleman gigolo complex. So the main thing I'm talking about here is this laundering of validation, this laundering of power, this laundering your dominance, right? Now, what I mean by that is this. When you are in a scarcity mindset, you may be in your innocence as a young kid. And within your innocence, there's a certain level of the feminine submissive, but as you become socialized, it brings the masculinity into your submissiveness, stifling it. When you're unable to grasp, right, and to communicate your sexual desires in a way that not only expresses need and neediness, right, wanting something from a woman, but of wanting to provide pleasure to her, wanting to give her a sexual experience that is awesome, and wanting to give her that pleasure that makes her desire to want to have sex with you, then what happens is when you provide enough to a woman, presenting yourself as the full package and offering a relationship, offering emotional validation, social validation, financial investment, right, which can oftentimes come in the form of dates, then oftentimes what many men will do who are heavily socialized and quote unquote blue pill is that they will form covert contracts where in their mind they base the value, most men, they'll base the value of having access to that woman sexually on the masculine submissive premise of her being masculine submissive as well, which means that they will be honest with each other and that they will stick to the rules of the engagement, regardless of how much compromise is included within that engagement. So a man will say, well, I'll provide for you, I'll protect you in exchange for sex. Now, most men, when they're young, when you're a boy, you don't yet have the resources to provide. You may not have the strength to protect, but provision and protection extends beyond money. If a man sees provision and protection as something that's just a matter of money, then even if he thinks he's a quote unquote high value man, or that he's in a position of abundance because of his abundance of resources, that does not mean that he is a dominant man who gives that woman the safety to be submissive with him, that gives her the safety to be feminine with him, to express herself and to express her true desires. If a woman smells sexual judgment on you, right, that you'll judge her for her desires and for who she is, for what she likes, for what she's into, then something in her is going to get into the masculine and it's going to shell up. Another thing to understand is this: if a woman feels that you want sex more than she does, right, and her core is to be feminine, her core is to be submissive, right, and you're trying to present yourself in a particular way, then if she feels you want sex more than she does, then she's going to establish a price in her mind. Because remember, the masculine submissive is based off of transaction, cooperation, and compromise, right? So what this means is this: if you bring up sex to a woman, if she does not already view you sexually, or if she gets the vibe that you want sex more than she does, then her mind is going to go to the price of what she believes her body is worth. Now, if she's in a low cup space, she's a nice girl, then she may set a low price, right? That's what men typically consider easy, right? That's not the feminine submissive. That's a low cup masculine submissive where the woman doesn't value herself highly. So a man may consider that woman easy, right? And we have to understand what easy means, right? There's a difference between easy and priceless. You want to deal with women on a foundation of pricelessness rather than easy. But the only way you can see a woman as priceless for having sex with you is if you view yourself as someone who's sexually desirable, sexually appealing, and you can look at that woman and say, if I was you in the same position that you're in, I'd fuck me too, right? If you can't do that, then you're going to put a price on how much you invest in that woman before you have sex with her to determine what her worth and her value is to you. So that means if a woman has sex with you quickly and you don't value yourself sexually, you're a masculine submissive man, then you're going to view her as a woman who has low worth and low value. You haven't integrated your anima to see a woman as having the capacity to have intrinsic sexual desire without that making her a whore within the Madonna whore complex. But if a woman has either a lack of awareness of her own sexuality, or she has a lack of sexual attraction to you, then she'll be willing to trade sexual access to you from a dominant position. Because remember, a masculine submissive woman is typically going to have a dominant mentality around her sexuality, which means that she's going to view herself as the primary receiver of control, meaning that you bend yourself, compromise with her, you do things with her to have sexual access to her, or, right, that's one part. Because remember, to be dominant is the primary giver of pleasure, primary receiver of control. And she's going to view sex as pleasure that she gives you in exchange for that control of how you interact with her. Now, this right here is a sexual polarity quadrant masterclass, right? I have several of these, some that are in the oven that are already recorded. They're just not out yet. I think I have like maybe one or two that are already on my YouTube, right? But what you have to understand is that when you are masculine submissive as a man, you lack capacity for truly having the feminine submissive towards your own emotional needs, towards your own enjoyment of that woman non-sexually, right? And this is where the primary roles come in. That's why I say primary, not only. So you're taking a dominant stance over the emotional and the non-sexual and the financial aspect of the relationship. Now, what happens within this is it makes sex transactional. So when you integrate your shadow, you get to a place where you start stepping into sexual dominance and dominance in general. So typically, a man's going to go from the masculine submissive, and if he is in a relationship with a woman where the natural sexual compatibility isn't high enough, or if things like that take place, right? If a man is in a relationship, they meet when they're young, their sexual compatibility is just very naturally occurring and it flows from there, then they may be good. You integrate the shadow together. She can tap into that submissive ego, especially if she's having vaginal orgasm from penetration in her first sexual relationship, her first long-term relationship. Then even if it started with the relationship, the fact that she's having those experiences that give her the capacity to desire sex, it puts her in a position where it's much easier to integrate. But if this does not happen, if you're neither able to feel comfortable tapping into the dominance of your sexual ego and feeling like that woman is receptive to it, but you're already emotionally invested, then you're going to feel as if you're compromising your dominance on some level in order to make her feel comfortable, in order to make her feel safe. But by doing that, it's not coming from a place of abundance. It's coming from a place of scarcity. Therefore, you're compromising and you're putting your wants, your needs, your desires to the side in order to make her comfortable. Now, in these situations, you have to understand that anytime the shadow is being overly repressed and suppressed and not integrated into the conscious mind, that it will sneak out in unconscious ways. Now, what does that look like? That woman may be talking to guys that she finds very sexually appealing and leveraging for plausible deniability. And with you, because you've invested so much before you engage with this woman sexually, the idea of another man having a better return on investment of sexual access based on how invested in her she is, a woman putting herself in the same scenario to create a sexual relationship that you were in is going to lead to instant feelings of insecurity and cause you to want to control her. And the fact that she's not conscious enough about her sexuality to know that that's what's going on, you're not going to trust her. And that will typically lead to a man going into the feminine dominant. Now, when this occurs, this is where game typically starts, right? So the woman may cheat on you, or if your shadow is overly repressed, you may just start cheating on her because you're too emotionally invested to simply just walk away. And then you feel like you found a good girl, a Madonna. You don't want her to, like, and I know men like this. I've dealt with women who have had men like this, where the man wouldn't want the woman to suck his dick because he felt like that was disrespectful. And a girl who's a good girl shouldn't do that. But then she came to me and she was ready for all that because I gave her a judgment-free zone, right? But there may be certain things sexually that if the woman presents a barrier to or resistance to, you'll respect it because you're already attached to her. But you may present those standards yourself, and you may talk in a very sexually judgmental way of valuing her for her lack of sexual experience and then calling other women hoes. So she's going to hide the hoe that's in her from you. But another man she doesn't have to hide it from is going to have much easier access to it, even if she's just as attracted to you as she is to them, right? That's something to understand. It's that cool factor, right? This is where we talk about the fuck boys, because the fuck boy is going to be a little bit quicker on the draw when it comes to maybe love bombing, giving plausible deniability instead of being upfront about his sexual intentions, and then capitalizing on that plausible deniability, capitalizing on allowing her to get into a sexually aroused state and then fucking her. So to avoid that, you may be very controlling, right? You may start setting certain boundaries where, all right, don't talk to other guys, don't do this, don't do that. And I do believe that there are certain boundaries for relationships that are beneficial, depending on the type of relationship that you have. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to not have boundaries, but the difference between being controlling and having standards is that when you have standards, these are things that you set before you go deeper into that relationship. Right? If we're talking about the biology first approach, if there are certain standards I have about monogamy, that's not really going to be something that's set until the woman expresses to me that she desires to be in a relationship. After we're already establishing sexual compatibility, she's already showing the emotion, the femininity that shows that she's receptive to seeing what's necessary to be with me. And if the woman then says she wants to be in a monogamous relationship, and if I'm at all open to it, my sexual needs are already met with her, that flow of energy is something that maintains and sustains me. And I feel like it sustains her as well. She naturally gets to the place where she's not fucking with other guys. Then there may be certain boundaries put into place where it's like, hey, listen, I'm cool with doing what we're doing right now, right? And if you understand my path of transitional dating from the biology first approach, it starts with hookup, then fuck buddy, then friends with benefits. Then you transition from friends with benefits into either a trial period of monogamy, right? Trial period of exclusivity, or you may transition into a polyamorous relationship or any variation of non-monogamy, right? And then from that place, if the woman is willing to do what it takes to go further, and you have the capacity to accept and embrace and still give her that level of safety, then you go from there into the next thing. If that doesn't work, then you stay where you are. And if she fucks it up where she's at, she gets demoted. So let's say you go through a trial period of exclusivity. If she is following the proper protocols, and if your sexual needs are met, her sexual needs are met, the communication is good on that front, and she doesn't have this desire to sleep with other guys that's just like overwhelming, then if that goes well for a period of time, then you may transition into a monogamous relationship. But you have to understand, you have to be consistent with what you lead with, but you're setting standards along the way. So you may get to the point where it's like, listen, when you're friends with benefits, if, like, let's say you're fuck buddies, you're cool with certain things. You're like, all right, cool. If you want to fuck other guys, I don't care. You want to talk to, hang out with other guys, I don't care. That's your business. Your ego and your emotions aren't that invested at that point, right? They're not that invested. So if she wants to do that, that's her business. Let's say you transition up into the friends with benefits. Now, this is where the emotional investment and the ego investment is at a certain place. And the reason why I say it's better to lead with dominance than to lead with masculinity, why that's more important up front, is because the standards that you set is where you orient your ego, right? What often leads to jealousy is that concept of comparing the return on investment sexually. So if you qualify for a woman for a relationship and she's pre-qualified for that relationship, and then she doesn't meet your needs, or she's rejecting you sexually and then she has sex with someone else, or let's say a woman tells you she's celibate for religious reasons and then she fucks somebody else or gives somebody else head or gives them a foot job, hand job, whatever it is, but she's not doing those things for you, then that negative return on investment in comparison to what someone else has received can lead to a feeling of distrust. So what the biology first approach does is it gives you the capacity to know what you want, to set your standards sexually about what needs to be going down. And then anything that she's done beyond that are things that you don't want to do, right? And you create a judgment-free zone. And you know what the dungeons and the depths of her sexuality are. And that's what creating the judgment-free zone do. A woman will just tell you what her fantasies are. If it's something that extends beyond what you'd be open to do, then you can let her know that, or you can just say, okay, cool, I'm not going to take this further because this goes against my personal values of what it is I want to engage in, right? Because you also don't want to be an individual who is creating this precedent where you want a woman to choose to be sexually unsatisfied in order to be in a relationship with you. Important concept to understand. Now, preferences can shift, but that's not what this video is about. Now, when you go through this process of dominance laundering, you have to understand this concept like money laundering, right? I'm sure we've all seen those drug dealers from the 80s, 90s, early 2000s who opened up barbershops, or who opened up hair salons, or who opened up car washes, who opened up chicken spots where they only take cash. If a place only takes cash in this day and age, typically they're money laundering, right? Now, what is that? That's going into the masculine submissive from a place of abundance after being in the feminine dominant, so that you can get that power from a position of something that's upfront, in a form that's consented to, and in a form that doesn't trigger the IRS to come and audit you. Now, what does that mean? That woman's animus is the IRS, right? That woman's social programming is the IRS, right? That woman's sense of safety in her femininity, based off of feeling that you're consistent on having integrity, standards, morals, values, characters, principles, and process, that is the IRS. See, it's not that a woman never has a right to hold you accountable. It's that you want a woman to hold you accountable to your own program, but she doesn't need to if you hold yourself accountable to your own program. So when it comes to dominance laundering, if you go into the feminine dominant, let's say you lie to a woman. Let's say you cheat on a woman. Some things can't be overcome in certain situations depending on your security level, but certain things can, right? And certain things can that other people can, right? So let's say when you're in the masculine submissive and you have these covert contracts, you go to the feminine dominant and you start to find ways of manipulating this woman and coercing this woman in order to get your sexual needs met, because you gave her this access to a monogamous relationship with you prematurely, right? Where you haven't even established that your sexual needs were met. So it feels as if this woman is siphoning energy off of you in a way where you don't feel adequately reciprocated. From that standpoint, if you try to communicate what your needs are later, to try to set standards later, then it feels like you're moving the goalpost, like you're not really consistent with what you want and who you are as a man. So in most of these instances, a man's not just going to leave if he's already invested, if he feels like he has a good girl. No, he's going to cheat, or he's going to manipulate her. He's going to pressure her. He's going to do some of these things that make her feel pressured to have sex with him. He's going to do some of these things, or he may find ways of seducing that woman, right? Seducing her to get her to a place where she sexually desires him. But the thing to understand about the masculine submissive is that the masculine submissive isn't in a high enough cup space to truly fathom being in the feminine submissive from a perspective of sexual desire. So the masculine submissive woman views sex as something that she gives a man. So it takes a certain form of seduction and or manipulation to put her in a position where her own sexuality is activated. And oftentimes when you do this, you're choosing to turn into the bad boy for a woman that you're with to trigger the reaction of the desire and the submissiveness that you want. You're using your own femininity, right, to lubricate her submissiveness, rather than her own femininity lubricating her own submissiveness so that she'll be receptive to dominance. So it could work like guilt tripping. It could work like giving a woman ultimatums. It could work in several different ways. Let's say you're dating a woman and she fucks up. let's say you're dating a woman and she don't suck dick. I wouldn't do that. But if you're doing that and then you catch her talking to her ex, right? You catch her flirting with guys or having guys in the inbox online, you know, because I'm talking about the scarcity mindset. I'm talking about a guy who's not in an abundance mindset. So let's say you catch her doing something that you don't like, and then you give her an ultimatum. From that ultimatum, you tax the woman, and from that taxing, then she's in a position where her guilt, her recognizing that she was wrong, her recognizing that her social programming isn't completely consistent with who she is and what's real about her. At that point in time, you go into the bad boy, and then you set a standard, and then now she's doing all of the things that she previously set rules with you that she wasn't willing to do. Right? Let's say you communicate your needs with a woman on a sexual level directly, and then after you communicate those needs with her, now she's in a position where she's resistant to it, so you start to pull away from her. Your ego doesn't feel safe with her. Your dominance doesn't feel safe with her enough for you to be willing to be understanding, accepting, and to give her the space to be who she really is. Right? You're stepping into the feminine dominant. You're using her fear of loss of you. You're using her fear of you being with someone else. You're using the fact that other women want you sexually to create feelings of loss, the fear of missing out, the fear of not having you around, the fear of losing you to another woman, to trigger that desire to feel dominance from you so that she could be in a position to step her fucking game up. And guess what? That should have worked for a little while, but it don't work forever. So what laundering your dominance is about is when you get to a certain place, even if you were the nice guy, even if you were the good guy, and that just wasn't working for you, she has to experience your dominance. She has to experience those orgasms. She has to experience that pleasure. She has to experience parts of her shadow that she wasn't aware of before this process of laundering can occur. So when you go into the feminine dominant, you use different tactics to get her to a place of being receptive to you. But after you get that, now you have to launder that. Right? Let's say you find ways of getting those experiences up to where your ego is oriented to. And then from that place, you then either set up a dom-sub dynamic, right? Where, and one thing that helps, right? Because one thing I say is this: the same reason that people take the feminine dominant, typically impulsiveness or overly emotional attachment or insecurity, is the same reason that people oftentimes aren't able to know when to hold them and when to fold them. If you take it too far, you may not get the woman back. Not always, but in most instances, it's going to work like that, right? Because the IRS pops up, right? When she thinks about her animus, when she thinks about what she views as masculinity, when she thinks about what she views as healthy communication, these are going to be things that become, when she thinks about her social programming, her religious values, all these different things, they're going to pop up. And although she may be sexually receptive to you right now, she's constantly in this process of losing a feeling of emotional safety and security with you.
Bob, why you sliding on them?
So in order to get through this, after you've reached certain standards, certain goals within the feminine dominant, you've established a certain level of power, right? You have to recognize when she's losing that emotional safety. You have to recognize when she's losing this feeling of security and trust in you. Because although you may feel like you're doing what's necessary, this still isn't something that's based in masculine dominance, which is leadership. She loses trust in your leadership. Now, what you want to create is positive feedback loops, right? But if that doesn't work, you have to go through steps of becoming more secure within yourself, becoming more emotionally mature, more just secure within yourself and your own ego. You have to take her to the place where you see those aspects of her shadow, and then you open up that dialogue. You open up that safe space. You open up giving her the freedom to express herself. And in this place, you also have to make sure that before you get there, you don't cross certain lines within the feminine dominant that you can't come back from. For you personally. Because if you do that, it may be very difficult for you. So for me, in my stance of feminine dominant, I never raped a woman. I never cheated. I've never cheated, right? I wouldn't lie to a woman. I had an ex for years. I could only think of 3 lies that I ever told her, and one of those lies was using the feminine dominant to have those experiences. And how did that work? One time we were having sex. It took her years to get there, but I recognized that every time she would get close when I was having sex with her, she would get close when she felt like I was getting close, because she was in a masculine submissive. So what I did was this. I lied to her and said that I was about to nut like 2 to 4 minutes before I actually was. And then when I finally came, she came at the same time that I did. And it's like a light switch flipped on. And then she started being able to have vaginal orgasms from penetration relatively consistently. Started having squirting orgasms, multiples, O-spot orgasms, entering into subspace, crying during sex. She was already doing the crying during sex, and from pleasure, from that feeling overwhelming. Because you have to understand that the masculine submissive woman is in a position where she's in a low cup space. The amount of energy that gets poured out when a woman is in subspace or in the feminine submissive is something that is so much energy that it can be overwhelming to experience dominance. It's not lubricated to experience dominance. That's what femininity does. But after this point, you have to start working on your security. You have to work on your program, right? You have to work on correcting things that you did that weren't the most emotionally safe things, and you have to bring certain aspects of your dominance into your program, right? In a way that she can consent to, in a way that she can understand and desire. She needs to crave your dominance. But then you also have to become more secure within yourself to be less controlling. You have to be more secure within yourself to set these standards, and you may have to break up first. Let her have space, so that instead of it feeling like you're pursuing her to try to be feminine dominant, using your pursuit of her to keep her around, right? Or using constantly pulling away to try to get her to correct her behavior, to modify her behavior. You want to give her some space, but to leave that door open, to let her know that you still care about her, to let her know that you still love her. But in this space, you have to work on your security, so that if she fucks someone else during this time, if she does things you wouldn't like during this time, if that's a deal breaker for you, then it is what it is. But at the same time, you want to be secure enough to give her the freedom to choose you on her own. You have to have the capacity to create that feeling of emotional safety with that woman, right? To where she feels free to express how she really feels and what she really thinks. Because when you step into the feminine dominant, oftentimes it comes from a place of insecurity with the low ego, right, a low cup, to where the woman will begin to feel like she's always walking on eggshells around you. And that will kill her ability to feel free to communicate to you what she's really feeling. That will keep her in her masculine energy. Because see, that's not the feminine submissive, that's the masculine submissive, right? The masculine submissive feels like cooperation and submissiveness, quote unquote, is something that she's giving a man, right? The feminine submissive is where submissiveness, her freedom to be submissive, her safety to feel submissive, to be in the feminine submissive, to feel like sex is something she's getting from you, to feel like guidance and leadership and protocols and program is something she's receiving from you, to feel like guidance is something she's receiving from you, to feel like the experience of being submissive for her is something she's receiving from you. That's a different thing than if she feels like she's betraying herself constantly to bend herself to you, so that she feels like she can keep you around. Because when a woman is in that state of mind, it's just a matter of time before you drain her cup too low, or the resentment causes you to become passive aggressive, right? If she's unable to keep up with your standards, right? Or you start to stop being gentle with her, right? You stop being understanding of her. You start using the fundamental attribution error. You start doing things that cause her to not feel safe with you, to not trust you anymore, to feel like you can't support her, to understand her and what she's going through. Even if you understand female sexual nature, if she's not conscious of her own sexual nature because she's in the masculine submissive, then even if you try to explain these things to her, she's going to not believe you and not trust you and feel like you don't truly understand her, even if what you're saying is correct, because you're trying to logically convince this woman to be in the feminine. You have to get to a point with your masculinity to where her femininity feels safe and can choose you. Right? And that takes a process of working on yourself. Right? Because when you use the feminine dominant to get the behavior modification that you want, typically that's not something that's going to last, because it needs to be something that's deeper than just on the sexual level. The sexual level is a good foundation when you're first meeting a woman, right? But ultimately, these things still have to be established. The reason why the sexual level is a good place to start is because it's much easier to listen to a woman and her true desires and how she really feels about things when your ego isn't yet invested in her, when your emotions are not yet invested in her, when your money is not yet invested in her, to where you feel entitled to a return on that investment, to where you're not worried about what it is she does when you're not around, because you don't know her like that, right? That's what the biology first approach does, so that you can see where she really is and ascertain the information to know whether or not that's a woman you want to take things further with. You got to understand that aspect of things, right? But when you're prematurely integrated, you have to launder it. So just like I said, you're going to have to go into the masculine submissive, right? But from a place of abundance, so that you can launder that power, launder your dominance into the masculine dominant, where she can consent to it, right? And it's a longer process. It is. But if you love that woman, you feel like that's a good woman. If you never learn to be secure in these certain ways, then these are going to be a reoccurring problem with most women you come across, even if a woman's feminine submissive with you up front. Because the thing to understand is that if you don't have a certain level of security within yourself, even if you're pretending or are masculine dominant with a woman when you first meet her, let's say you're dealing with a woman for 3 months, you're the best dick she ever had because you gave her that judgment-free zone. You created that safety with her. But then let's say she go fuck somebody else before you're in a relationship. Now you're like, oh, I don't want to know more. Your feelings is hurt. Your ego's hurt. Now you're using a fundamental attribution error. You're talking down to her. You're making her feel bad about herself. Now she doesn't feel safe. Now you see her as a whore because you haven't integrated your anima to see a woman as a full person. So you have to understand that a woman in the feminine submissive, that's just to the peak of her desire. The moment she drops down, her cup drops down. If you drain too much out of her, when her cup drops down from the feminine submissive, she's either going to be in the feminine dominant and become mad and consistent, right? Mad and consistent, try to manipulate you to get her power back, right? So she might try to do like no contact or some shit like that, trying to get her power back, or try to use the Delilah syndrome to try to get her power back. Or she might go into the masculine submissive and think about what she feels her body is worth, what she feels her cooperation is worth, and then want the relationship to be based on mutuality and reciprocity in a level that's really transactional for her body, rather than on a level of these are our goals and this is the things that need to be aligned. And then she starts to judge you off of her animus and her social programming rather than getting on your program. Because a woman can be submissive with you sexually, and that it can even extend into her being submissive with you emotionally. But ultimately, the mind, the heart, and the pussy have to be in line. They have to be in alignment. So her pussy can be submissive with you, but her heart can be elsewhere, and her head can be elsewhere. Her logic can be elsewhere, her animus, right? You want to influence that animus. Due to you being more solid in who you are, what you stand on, and your principles, than her animus that is not integrated, and the good guy she has in her mind is the gentleman gigolo complex and how to overcome it, right? Now, a woman's pussy and her heart can be in alignment, but if her head is elsewhere and you don't have her mind, right, then it could be a situation where as long as she's in a highly emotional or highly aroused state of mind, she'll be submissive with you and do whatever. But if she loses too much, if she spends too much money that puts her at a deficit, if she's becoming distracted from herself and her goals and her own self-actualization, then eventually if her cup gets a little bit low, she's going to start to think logically about that relationship dynamic, and then she's going to want out, or she's going to sabotage it, or try to do something that can trigger insecurity in you to prove to herself that you're not as masculine as you think or say you are. Therefore, you can get butthurt. You can start to judge her so that she feels the freedom to walk away. She may try to stroke your ego and love bomb you to get you to try to reciprocate on the level of emotional she's pouring out to you, so that she can feel like she got her power back, so that she can go into a masculine state of mind and walk away. So the pussy, the head, and the heart, the body, the head, heart, all those things have to be in alignment in order for integration to really take place. So I typically believe that if you're prematurely integrated, it's oftentimes best to go back and establish polarity. But like I said, masculinity is more powerful in the long run, while dominance is going to be more powerful in the short run. So this is Coach Brody on dominance laundering. I think this is a very important concept to understand for people in prematurely integrated relationships. Think about it like the drug dealer, because you got to think about it like the drug dealer, the person who does something illegal, right? If you think about most of the major corporations or American society itself, right? This country was built off the backs of slaves. That's the feminine dominant. That's using people and hurting people in order to achieve a certain level of success and power, right? That's slavery. That was never corrected. That was never laundered. And the American government and the society is doing everything it can to cut its nose to spite its face, putting every social cause over the travesty of slavery in order to avoid laundering that dominance, right? To adequately do it, to correct things, to set things straight. And it's losing money on top of money on top of money, trying to make everything more important than that instead of covering that issue and making sure that things are set straight, paying reparations, right? Think about JP Morgan, one of the biggest banks in the country, right? It was built off the backs of slave money. Think about the rappers that we know. Most of the big rappers we know, a lot of them started off as drug dealers, like Jay-Z, right? Started off as gangbangers. But then, you know, they were doing things that were harmful to their community, took that money, but then they eventually, if they knew when to hold them and knew when to fold them, then they would go legit. But even then, they probably got certain things that are looming over their heads. Think about the situation where if you don't know when to hold them and when to fold them, and you try to take both lifestyles into the future, then eventually it's going to catch up with you. I remember, I don't remember who it was that T.I. was talking to, but he told somebody, hey, you can't do both. You either got to choose the streets or you got to choose this music, this legit money, right? You have to launder, right? You think about the people who did things that were harmful to others, harmful to themselves, harmful to the community in order to get to a certain space. If they don't launder that, then they're going to be in a bad spot. Think about those people who use steroids, right? That feminine dominant can catch up with you if you never have the ability or the capacity to take yourself to a place where you can achieve similar results or the same results through logical and acceptable means. And some of those means aren't always going to be long term. Think about it like those guys who use steroids for their fights, then they get caught on steroids. Some people are able to get caught on it, and then they're still able to get to a place where they use their skills to move forward. Like Tyson Fury got caught with steroids, right? He got caught with that stuff in his system, but he was able to work to get to a place where even without that stuff, he was able to get forward. You know, he still had some cheating and stuff, but that's a different conversation. I'm not trying to get too deep into that boxing shit right now, right? Or think about Lance Armstrong. He was taking steroids to run those races, but then when he finally got caught up after his career, you know, when he got caught up after his career, they tried to strip away his accomplishments, right? Think about YSL, that trial that's going on right now, right? Where the feminine dominant was used. You know, they wanted to a certain extent, it seemed like they kept engaging in certain aspects of street life after achieving a certain level of success instead of going completely legit. Then the court system, the IRS, the feds, they come for you. The feds are watching, right? Think about all these scenarios. But then we've also seen people who were able to make it work, like the Trumps, right? Like the Trumps started off bootlegging. The Kennedys started off bootlegging. That was feminine dominant. It was illegal at the time, but they were able to get to a place where they were able to turn that into legit money. And oftentimes, a lot of the biggest things that we see, they start off like that, right? A lot of the biggest companies, corporations, identities, and personalities, and companies, they start off like that, off the feminine dominant. It's the back of it, right? Some people are in a scarcity mindset, and they're in a survival mode where they're not in a position to achieve. Like, you really think most people are going to become millionaires working a 9-to-5 job? That's going to be unrealistic for most. Unrealistic for most, right? No matter how much money you save, typically it's not going to happen like that unless you put masculinity first, and then you work your way up, you show discipline, you get access to the right information, and then you make right investments, make right decisions, and then you move forward. Right? So certain things can catch up with people, and certain things can keep people in a stagnant space in life. So, like I said, we've seen people, it's just like you have to understand that when you're operating at the feminine dominance, when you're doing illegal things to get the power to be in a position of dominance, that may eventually catch up with you. So that laundering is that process of going back into that discipline, that hard work, that personal development of being in a position to make things legit. Like I said, if you got a bunch of drug money in this day and age, money without proof of income, without proof of employment, and then you go to a car dealership to try to get a brand new car off the lot. If you don't have credit, right? If you don't have proof of employment, proof of income, the IRS might come knocking. They may not sell you the car. You go to a nice neighborhood to try to purchase a home with that drug money, and it hasn't been laundered, right? You try to live flashy, right? Like I said, that same impulsiveness that gets people to take a feminine dominant stance, that same insecurity that causes people to take a feminine dominant stance from survival mode is typically the same thing that causes them to not know when to hold them and when to fold them. But when people launder that money, they open up a barbershop, they open up a car wash, they open up a chicken spot that has cash flow. If they do what they're supposed to do and they take that money, they stop doing certain things in the community, right? Then they may be able to get that cash flow in a way that's legal, right? And then after they clean that money up, then they're in a position where they can then move on to investing that money in other businesses, right? To getting a new house, to getting a new car with proof of income. You can't take that feminine dominance and try to go all the way with it, right? And I'll give another example. Sometimes these things can go left. I was thinking about Liver King. He told all these people these lies about these steroids. Now he's getting caught up. Now people are suing him. Now people have lost faith in him because he told all these lies. He wasn't able to integrate that in, right? Because his entire premise of what his masculine stance, quote unquote, isn't real, and it isn't integral. It isn't part of the integrity of his brand. Your brand needs to be in line with the things that your principles stand for, that you express verbally. It's more important to be consistent than it is to be right. Because there are some people, like More Place, More Dates, who admits that he's used steroids before. He has a big platform. He's admitted that he's used steroids. He admits that he's on TRT right now, and he can move forward, right? Look at Andrew Tate. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of all his ideologies, but man, I love the Tate brothers. I love their bond. I love their connection, right? I love that shit. But
Why you sliding on them?
you have to understand that in some avenues, especially in this day and age, oftentimes in order to blow up on social media, to get the clout, to get the money, a lot of people aren't really looking to listen to a good message. So you can take the things that you believe are true to sensationalize them a little bit to get clout by triggering people. But sometimes it doesn't turn out the best. But that's why I do say that there's nothing wrong with sensationalizing it a little bit, as long as what you're sensationalizing is in line with your principles and your morals and your standards and your values, right? But when you go out of your way to disrespect and to trigger people, right, and to hurt people in order to spread a message, right, and you misrepresent yourself to get that clout, to use the feminine dominance, like negging could be an instance of that, is different things, then eventually people are not going to fuck with you, or the people who do, they're going to fuck with you the long way, but certain institutions are going to come down on you. Look at Tasha K. She would tell lies and sell lies, in order to sell her content, then she got sued for $4 million by Cardi B. How many people has she lied on throughout the years in order to push her content, to get the views, to get the clickbait? So we got to understand that there is laundering of the dominance. You launder the dominance. And part of that is, let's say, I'm going to give you an example right now, right? It is not according to the motherfucking Facebook community guidelines for me to be cursing as much as I do, right? I curse like a sailor. I understand that because I'm not big enough right now that I can speak about my sexual topics, that I can talk about the things that I want to talk about, that I can pretty much say whatever the fuck I want to say. But if I become monetized, then I won't be able to speak the same way I do, right? I'm going to have to switch my platforms to go to Patreon, to have my own website, to do certain things, and then have to make more in line with community guidelines content for YouTube so that my videos don't get demonetized and flagged. Right? So this is Coach Brody on Laundering Dominance. I'm out.